Long before any ships from Europe crossed the vast Atlantic Ocean, the land we now call America was already home to millions of people. These were the first Americans, often called Native Americans or American Indians. They were not one single group. Instead, they belonged to hundreds of different tribes, each with its own language, its own beliefs, and its own special way of life. From the dense forests of the East to the wide-open plains of the Midwest and the sun-baked deserts of the Southwest, these societies were incredibly diverse. They built complex communities, developed sophisticated systems of farming, and created rich cultural traditions that were passed down through many generations, shaping the very soul of the continent. In the Northeast, tribes like the Iroquois formed a powerful confederacy of nations, living in longhouses and mastering the art of forest agriculture. They grew corn, beans, and squash, the Three Sisters, which supported their large populations and complex political structures. In the Great Plains, tribes such as the Sioux and the Cheyenne were expert hunters who followed the massive herds of buffalo, using every part of the animal for food, clothing, and shelter. Their lives were deeply connected to the rhythm of the seasons and the movement of the great herds across the endless grasslands, a testament to their adaptability and deep understanding of their environment. Further west, in the arid lands of what is now Arizona and New Mexico, the Pueblo peoples built remarkable cities of stone and adobe, some nestled into the sides of cliffs. They were skilled farmers who developed intricate irrigation systems to water their crops in the dry climate, creating oases of life in the desert. In the Pacific Northwest, tribes like the Chinook and the Tlingit thrived on the abundance of the sea, catching salmon and building sturdy cedar plank houses. Their societies were known for their elaborate totem poles and potlatch ceremonies, grand feasts that displayed their wealth and social status, showcasing a vibrant artistic and social heritage. These diverse cultures demonstrate that America was not an empty wilderness waiting to be discovered. It was a continent bustling with life, filled with established nations and peoples who had inhabited the land for thousands of years. They had their own governments, their own economies, and their own histories written not in books, but in the stories they told, the art they created, and the land they cherished. When European explorers finally arrived, they did not step into a new world, but into an old one with a deep and complex history that would soon be forever changed by their arrival and the powerful forces they brought with them. The story of the United States as we know it began with a great age of exploration. European nations like Spain, France, and England grew curious about what lay beyond the horizon. Fueled by a desire for riches, new trade routes to Asia, and the ambition to spread their Christian faith, they sent brave sailors across the treacherous Atlantic Ocean. Spain was one of the first to establish a major presence, creating colonies in Florida, the Southwest, and Mexico. They were searching for gold and silver, and their arrival brought immense changes, introducing new animals like horses but also new diseases that devastated Native American populations, altering the continent's destiny. England was another powerful player in this race for a foothold in the New World. Their first permanent settlement was established in 1607 at Jamestown, in what is now Virginia. These early English colonists faced incredible hardships, from starvation and disease to conflicts with the local Powhatan tribes. They were looking for economic opportunities, and they soon found one in a crop called tobacco, which became hugely popular in Europe. The success of tobacco farming created a demand for labor, which led to the system of indentured servitude, and tragically, the beginning of African slavery in the colonies, a dark chapter that would have profound and lasting consequences. Over the next century and a half, 13 distinct British colonies took root along the Atlantic coast. These colonies developed unique identities based on their geography, economy, and the reasons they were founded. In the north, the New England colonies, like Massachusetts, were often settled by people seeking religious freedom, such as the Pilgrims and the Puritans. Their economy was built on small farms, fishing, shipbuilding, and trade. Life in these communities often revolved around the church and the town meeting, fostering a sense of self-government and a strong community bond that would later fuel revolutionary ideas. In the South, colonies like Virginia and South Carolina had a very different character. The warm climate and fertile soil were perfect for growing cash crops like tobacco, rice, and indigo on large plantations. This plantation economy relied heavily on the forced labor of enslaved Africans, creating a society with a rigid social hierarchy dominated by a wealthy class of landowners. These deep economic and social differences between the northern and southern colonies created distinct cultures and priorities, setting the stage for future disagreements and conflicts as they grew from separate settlements into a collection of powerful British provinces. For many years, the 13 colonies enjoyed a fair amount of freedom, largely governing themselves while remaining loyal subjects of the British king. This relationship, however, began to sour after the French and Indian War, which ended in 1763. The war was very expensive for Great Britain, and the British government believed the American colonists should help pay for the cost of their own defense. To raise money, Parliament in London passed a series of new taxes on the colonies. Acts like the Stamp Act, which taxed paper goods, and the Townshend Acts, which taxed items like tea, glass, and paint, angered the colonists deeply. The colonists were not just upset about the money, they were furious about the principle. They had no representatives in the British Parliament, so they believed Parliament had no right to tax them. Their rallying cry became, "No taxation without representation." This idea, that a government can only tax its people if those people have a voice in that government, was a powerful one. Protests erupted across the colonies. Groups like the Sons of Liberty organized boycotts of British goods, and sometimes the protests turned violent. A tense standoff in 1770 led to the Boston Massacre, where British soldiers fired into a crowd, killing 5 colonists and fueling public outrage. The situation reached a breaking point with the Tea Act of 1773. While this act actually made tea cheaper, it gave a British company a monopoly on the tea trade, which the colonists saw as another attempt to control them and undermine their local merchants. In December of that year, a group of colonists disguised as Native Americans boarded 3 British ships in Boston Harbor and dumped hundreds of chests of tea into the water. This bold act of defiance, known as the Boston Tea Party, was a clear message to the king. Britain responded harshly with a set of laws the colonists called the Intolerable Acts, which closed Boston's port and stripped Massachusetts of its self-government. These punitive measures pushed the colonies closer to rebellion. In 1774, delegates from 12 of the 13 colonies met in Philadelphia for the First Continental Congress to coordinate their response. The following year, the first shots of the American Revolution were fired at Lexington and Concord in Massachusetts, as colonial militiamen, the Minutemen, clashed with British soldiers. The War for Independence had begun. At the Second Continental Congress, the delegates made a monumental decision. On July 4, 1776, they adopted the Declaration of Independence, a document that boldly declared that the 13 colonies were now free and independent states. The Declaration of Independence, primarily written by Thomas Jefferson, was more than just a breakup letter to King George III. It laid out the core principles of the new nation, that all men are created equal, that they have certain unalienable rights, including life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, and that governments get their power from the consent of the governed. The Revolutionary War was a long and difficult struggle. The Continental Army, led by the steadfast General George Washington, faced the most powerful military in the world. Key moments like the surprise victory at Trenton and the major turning point at the Battle of Saratoga, which convinced France to join as an ally, kept the hope of independence alive. After years of fighting, the final major battle took place at Yorktown, Virginia, in 1781. With the help of the French Navy, Washington's army trapped the British forces, forcing their surrender. 2 years later, the Treaty of Paris was signed, and Great Britain officially recognized the United States of America as an independent nation. Winning the war was one thing, building a country was another. The first government, established under the Articles of Confederation, was too weak. It couldn't effectively tax or create a unified national policy, so in 1787 leaders met once again in Philadelphia to create a new framework for the nation. The result of that convention was the United States Constitution, a brilliant document that designed a strong yet flexible federal government with 3 separate branches: the legislative, or Congress, the executive, or the president, and the judicial, or the Supreme Court. It created a system of checks and balances to ensure that no single branch could become too powerful. To address fears that the new government might infringe on people's freedoms, a Bill of Rights was added. These first 10 amendments to the Constitution guarantee essential liberties such as freedom of speech, religion, and the press, protecting the fundamental rights of every American citizen. With a new government in place, the young country began to grow rapidly. It expanded westward, pushing its borders across the continent through treaties, purchases, and conflict. fulfilling a belief in manifest destiny. However, the nation was still deeply divided over the issue of slavery. The economic and cultural gap between the industrial North and the agricultural slaveholding South widened until it finally erupted into the devastating Civil War in 1861. The Union's victory preserved the nation and led to the abolition of slavery, but the struggle to live up to the founding ideal that all men are created equal would continue for generations, shaping the ongoing story of the United States.